We're turning now to our top story this morning. In Ottawa, all eyes will be on who is in cabinet when Prime Minister-designate Mark Carney is sworn in as Canada's new Prime Minister. Sources tell CTV News Chrystia Freeland has been offered the role of Transport Minister. Immigration Minister Mark Carney and Procurement Minister Jean-Yves Duclos are not returning to cabinet. Health Minister Mark Holland says he will not run in the next election. So for a closer look now what to expect, I'm joined from Ottawa by Laura D'Angelo, Vice President of National Strategy and Public Affairs at Enterprise Canada. Good morning, Laura. Thanks so much for being with us. So this is going to be the cabinet that takes Mark Carney and the rest of Canada into the next election. So given that, what are you expecting as his cabinet takes shape today?
That's such a great question, Marcia. One of the things we think about when we're looking at a cabinet is what does a cabinet tell us about a leader or a government? And, you know, it's their priorities, who supported them in the past, and what they're signaling to Canadians. Mark Carney has been very clear through his leadership and certainly through his first, few days as Prime Minister designate that he's going to focus on practical, real solutions for Canadians that get us through this trade war as strong as possible and help to grow the economy. So if we keep that in mind, all of these reports that we're starting to hear about a much smaller, pared down cabinet start to make sense. When you go from a table of 36 or 37 people, which is what is currently the cabinet table, to 15 to 20 people, that's a lot of people who are empowered to drive to those really specific goals that Mark Carney has laid out. Every minister is going to have a much bigger portfolio and a lot more responsibility.
And there's a lot of speculation about who's in and who's out, and who's out or who may be left out is almost as interesting as who's staying, Laura.
It certainly is. And, I would be lying if I said here in Ottawa, everyone's phones and Slack chats are not blowing up with who's going to be who in the zoo. But it's also, really interesting because it signals something to Canadians and to politicos in particular about an election strategy as well. It signals what regions they're going to be focusing on. It signals what kind of demographics they need to pay attention to and what they think is resonating with Canadians as we move forward. But certainly right now, what we're expecting is what, I like to call a change cabinet. Mark Carney is being very clear that this is a new government. He is a new leader, and this is a new Liberal Party.
So the Globe and Mail is reporting that Carney will visit France and the UK next week as his first trip as Prime Minister, notably not the US. Carney campaigned on diversifying Canada's trade relationships during the leadership race. So what would Carney hope to accomplish by traveling there with next week's visits?
I think it's exactly what you just outlined. Mark Carney is really trying to signal to Canadians that we are going to diversify Canada's economy to make it stronger and to make sure that Canadians are in the best position possible, not just for the duration of the trade war, but that coming out of it, Canadians are in a really strong position economically worldwide. And also, I would imagine it's to make sure that we're closely aligned with our allies, because Canada is not the only one that Donald Trump is putting tariffs on and frankly, attacking economically.
Of course, everybody's watching to see what that first meeting will look like, or when that meeting will happen between Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump. Carney had this to say on that potential meeting with the U.S. president. Let's play that sound.
I'm ready to sit down with President Trump at the appropriate time under a position where there's respect for Canadian sovereignty, and we're working for a common approach, a much more comprehensive approach for trade.
What does that mean to you? Can you translate? I mean, as recently as yesterday, Trump was once again bashing Canada, saying, they should be a 51st state, but we'll let them keep their anthem.
I mean, to me, this means Mark Carney's not going to sit down with Donald Trump just to be, pushed around, or for Donald Trump to be allowed to say, frankly, egregious and crazy things like making Canada the 51st state. Mark Carney wants to have a productive conversation, and he is going to be doing everything he can to drive towards that and not just give into the hyperbole that we're seeing right now.
I have to, of course, ask you this last question, and that is, when could we be heading to the polls? Carney could reportedly call an election as early as next week, not waiting for Parliament to resume. So when should Canadians circle that date on their calendars?
I mean, it's widely reported right now that we're looking at an election date of April 28th or May 5th, which would mean, the writs are issued very soon. I will say there is so much that goes into deciding when we have an election. Everything from, do you have a candidate in every riding? Is your leader ready to perform, on the big stage? It certainly seems like Prime Minister-designate Mark Carney is. To the logistics, something that I'm very familiar with when it comes to a campaign. But there's also the political calculation. And, right now, Mark Carney is riding this really wonderful wave of momentum. The other parties have, importantly, asked for an election. And it's very clear that Mark Carney wants to be governing from a place of stability, and that does come from having an election and Canadians getting their voices heard. So I think we should all be prepared for an election in short order.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.